This video lecture has been produced using artificial intelligence with the supervision of Belhaven faculty. Welcome. In our discussion today, we're going to be focusing on a really crucial and honestly an often overlooked part of group counseling, the final stage. We're going to explore the process of termination, not just as an ending, but as a truly vital phase of growth. We'll also see how it applies in different settings, like schools and communities.
So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll start with our main learning objectives. Then we'll dive right into the nature of termination, looking at the emotional side of things. After that, we'll get very practical and cover the core tasks involved, talk about assessment and follow-up, and finally, we'll compare how these principles work in different group contexts.
All right, let's get right into it. It is absolutely essential to understand that the termination stage is not just about saying goodbye. It's a purposeful and clinically significant phase, a time where all the learning gets consolidated, relationships are acknowledged, and members are really prepared to move forward on their own.
We really have three main goals for our time together. First, we're going to define the core tasks of termination, what actually happens in this stage. This means looking at how we review goals, how we consolidate all the gains that have been made, and, of course, how to handle the very real emotional reactions that come with ending. Second, we'll turn to evaluation. How do we actually know if the group was effective? We'll summarize the strategies for assessment and for ethical planning for what comes next. And finally, our third objective is to bring it all together. The goal is that you'll be able to construct a complete group work plan for a specific setting, pulling in everything from theory and technique to diversity and ethics.
Now, with that framework in mind, let's really explore the nature of termination itself. You see, this stage is defined by both some powerful emotional dynamics and some important structural factors that as a group leader, you have to navigate carefully.
The final stage of a group can be, well, incredibly emotional. Members have likely spent a lot of time together, built real relationships, and experienced significant growth. So as the end approaches, these emotions can run very high. And what's interesting is this duality of the experience. It can be deeply rewarding as members recognize their progress, but it can also be quite difficult as they face the end of that shared journey.
Now, the experience of termination also looks very different depending on the group's structure. In a closed group where everyone starts and ends together, this final stage is a shared conclusion. It finalizes that collective journey. But in an open group, termination is much more complex. You have some members leaving while new ones might be joining, and others are remaining. This creates a really dynamic environment that requires the careful management of these staggered, ongoing endings.
Okay, so we understand the emotional landscape. The question then becomes, how do we actually navigate it? Let's shift our focus now to the specific, actionable tasks a group leader needs to facilitate to ensure an effective and ethical termination process.
The termination stage is really structured around three core tasks. First up is reviewing goals. This involves looking all the way back to the initial objectives and assessing both individual and group progress. The second task is all about consolidating gains. Here, the focus is on reinforcing the skills and insights members have developed, and, this is key, encouraging them to apply this learning in their lives outside of the group. And the third task is handling those ending reactions. This means creating the space to address feelings of loss or anxiety, normalizing these mixed emotions, and using closure rituals to help members process the end of their shared experience in a healthy way.
So what might this look like in practice? Well, leaders can use structured activities to help. For example, the rose and thorn exercise is a reflective tool that allows members to acknowledge the positives, that's the rose, and process challenges, the thorn, while also looking toward the future. Another great technique is the word gift. This is a symbolic activity where members offer affirming words like joy or peace to one another as a sort of parting gift, which really helps reinforce their connection and their growth.
And this idea of looking forward brings us to something that is both ethically and practically essential: assessment and planning. The work doesn't just stop at that last session. Effective termination involves evaluating outcomes and preparing members for whatever comes next.
So how do we actually assess the group's effectiveness? Well, we have several methods in our toolkit. Members' self-reports and feedback forms give us really valuable subjective insight. Leader observations of things like participation, growth, and group cohesion offer a more clinical perspective. And then pre- and post-assessments can provide more objective data on changes in specific skills or symptoms. Using a mix of these methods really gives us the most comprehensive picture.
And this is so important. Termination has to look forward. This means careful planning for follow-up and referrals to ensure there's a continuity of care. This could mean providing referrals for individual counseling or connecting members with community resources. It might also involve offering booster sessions or alumni groups to reinforce skills, or even just encouraging pure accountability to help members keep practicing what they've learned.
Okay, for our final section, let's shift gears a bit and look at how these principles of group work, especially termination, are adapted to fit the unique demands of different professional settings.
This table does a great job of breaking down the key differences. As you can see, clinical groups are primarily focused on the treatment of psychological disorders. The emphasis there is on things like confidentiality, the therapeutic alliance, and reducing symptoms. In contrast, school and community groups often focus more on education, prevention, or support. Their emphasis is more on accessibility, diversity, and building practical, real-world skills. This also presents different ethical considerations. For instance, a school counselor has to constantly balance client confidentiality with the policies of their institution.
So, I want to leave you with a question to really think about. How does viewing termination as a distinct intentional stage, rather than just an afterthought, elevate both the ethical and the clinical efficacy of group work? When we treat termination as a foundational part of the process, it fundamentally changes how we facilitate groups and, more importantly, how we support our members' continued growth long after the group has ended. And just for your reference, the material for this discussion was drawn primarily from the excellent work of Corey, and Corey in their text, Groups, Process, and Practice.